Joining us today is Congresswoman Michele Bachmann. Representative, thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, my first question is going to be old school, and by old school I mean we're talking people in powdered wigs here. Jane Madison had some notes on the Constitutional Convention that the power given to Congress specifically was to make war, and that the president only had the power to repel sudden attacks. Quote from George Washington, he wrote, "No offensive expedition of importance can be undertaken until after Congress has deliberated upon the subject and authorized such a measure." So in your view, does the Constitution require the president to get the approval of Congress before taking a military action like the one in Libya? Does he need to do that?
Well, the Constitution is clear on giving Congress the authority over wars. However, we have had subsequent laws passed by Congress, one being the War Powers Act, and we've had other acts as well. So that has changed somewhat those lines between the executive and the Congress. However, I think it's interesting that President Obama, when he was candidate Obama, was talking about how he was deriding President Bush for doing exactly the identical thing that President Obama has done. I think the bigger issue dealing with Libya right now is the fact that Secretary of State Gates came out and said Gaddafi was not a threat to the United States, nor is there any vital American interest in Libya. Those are the first prerequisites before the United States would intervene militarily. And now we're seeing the playing out of the Obama Doctrine. The Obama Doctrine for war is very different than how the United States has approached foreign engagements. Now it is based upon humanitarian causes. Well, there are humanitarian causes all across the world in any given week. So he wants to use the United States military to intervene where he sees a humanitarian reason. The United States is probably the most humanitarian nation in the world, probably one of the most generous, compassionate nations in the world. But we don't even meet, Libya doesn't even meet the first step or criteria for American engagement. This was the wrong place at the wrong time, and I fear that we could have very, very bad consequences from this. When there was rioting in Cairo with Mubarak in Egypt, the president wasn't willing to lift a finger or do anything there. Yet, Mubarak was one of our strongest U.S.-related allies in that region, and Egypt controls the Suez Canal. The president wasn't willing to do anything. Mubarak fell. Now it appears that the Muslim Brotherhood may potentially start to run Egypt. We don't know until elections are called. But in Libya, the other problem is we don't know who the opposition is to Gaddafi. We don't know who the rebels are. We had testimony yesterday from NATO saying that there are flickers of al-Qaeda. We've heard this before. Last Friday, the United Kingdom Telegraph reported that there are al-Qaeda veterans that have come out of eastern Libya to go and fight against our U.S. soldiers in Iraq contained within the rebel forces. We don't know who the opposition is. And so for the United States to intervene in that in the civil war that's occurring in Libya, to take sides with people that we don't even know who they are, and now the president is potentially looking at arming them and potentially having Marines on the ground, this is Obama's war. He calls it a kinetic military exercise, but this is war. He refused to call terrorists terrorists. He calls them extremists. These are potential terrorists that we could be arming and equipping. And why the United States would get involved in Libya when there is no American vital interest, when Gaddafi is not posing a threat to the United States, when we don't know who the opposition's forces are, when in fact they may possibly be al-Qaeda or Hezbollah or Hamas, terrorist organizations. This is beyond foolish. It is acting before we even know what's going on in the ground.
Given that, should he have gone to Congress for approval, or does he have the unilateral power to make this type of decision?
I think that I think that it is I think it's probably safe to say that I think there are cases when a president can act without going to Congress. I think there are, but I think
under the Constitution, you think that's allowed?
Normally, what a president should do is come to Congress. That is what a president should do. And in the case of Libya, the unrest had been going on for at least a month, if not 6 weeks. So this did not catch us by surprise. Congress was in in session, both the House and the Senate. We were here until Friday. The president started military intervention on a Friday night. So we were here the entire time. The president could have consulted with us. Later on Friday, he had a very small bipartisan group that he talked with, but the president had already made the decision unilaterally. And so the president made the decision, military action was begun, without even having really the proper information upon which to make that decision. So yes, Congress should have been consulted, but I want to qualify that by saying I do think that there can be extraordinary circumstances when a president could make a decision.
So where does it go from here? The issue in Libya. How do you see
well, it's
this
a
progressing,
mess.
and what's the role of Congress
Now
at
it's
this
a
point?
mess. Now it's a mess. I had just read a story that said that $600 million has already been spent in a week of U.S. involvement. So we're looking at very high costs. Also, I think it's interesting that it seemed that the president is declaring mission accomplished, what he accused George Bush of saying, because he was saying that they were successful in what they've been able to do, and now they've transferred the authority to NATO. How does this give comfort to the American people? We are NATO. We contribute more to NATO than the than the second and third country combined. We contribute almost 25% of NATO's funds. If you combine Britain and France, number 2 and number 3 respectively, they don't even equal our share that we contribute. We're continuing to put brave young men and women in harm's way. We're continuing to pay for aircraft, for equipment, and for other costs that are associated with this effort. And it appears that the president is willing to go deeper and further. This is all while we're still engaged in Iraq, still engaged in Afghanistan, and now a third Middle East war under President Obama's watch. This is his war. I think it was the wrong decision at the wrong time, and I'm sorry that he made that decision.
Talk about the money that's being spent on this. Obviously, federal funding, something that's going to be debated quite extensively today. You voted against the last CR. It had money to continue to fund Obamacare, it had money for Planned Parenthood. What do you expect to see in the federal funding bill that's going to be coming up, or will we see a federal shutdown?
Well, we know now that the Democrats want a federal shutdown. They've said that. Chuck Schumer has said that, Harry Reid has said that, and Howard Dean has said that. So clearly the Democrats want a shutdown. They own the shutdown, not the Republicans.
Will they be able to?
Well, they're hoping that their allies in the mainstream media will get on board with their talking points and blame Republicans. The problem is not Republicans, and the problem is clearly not the Tea Party. The Tea Party, which is a broad swath of America, Democrats, Independents, Republicans, Libertarians, apolitical people, just people that want the country to work again, they want us to cut spending. And they also want us to get rid of Obamacare. Just the latest poll that came out, 58% of Americans want us to get rid of Obamacare. In over a year, it's never been less than a majority of Americans have wanted us to get rid of it. That is my criterion for voting on a budget. We have to defund Obamacare in a budget in order for me to give my vote for the budget bill. Otherwise, I can't do that, because Obamacare will literally cost us over $1 trillion if we keep it in place. And it's predicated upon a lie. The president told us we would see $2,500 reduction in a household for our health insurance premiums. Instead, we're seeing spikes of 20% increases and 40% increases on premiums. That's for people. The government costs will escalate. The state government costs will escalate. So if we want to be serious about cutting spending, we have to defund Obamacare.
What's your take? I know Mike Pence has spoken out on Planned Parenthood's funding. What's your take on that?
Well, I don't believe that we should be involved in funding Planned Parenthood either. Planned Parenthood is a $1 billion a year corporation. And one of their executives in the state of Illinois said they want to become the lens crafters of big abortion. And I say if that's what they want to do, then they should drop their 501c3 status. They should declare themselves a for-profit corporation. In effect, that's how they're operating today. And so therefore, they should not get the benefit of a tax-free status, nor should they get $300 million in taxpayer grants. We can do far better than that. And it's a violation of people's conscience in the United States to pay taxes knowing full well that grants are given to Planned Parenthood. Plus, that's another reason to oppose Obamacare, because Obamacare contains in it also the seeds of taxpayer-funded abortion. We've never done that before in the history of the country. And I don't think that we should force people to violate their moral conscience by paying taxes to pay for other people's abortions.
Given your stance on those two issues, Obamacare and Planned Parenthood funding in a funding resolution, also all the talk about the federal shutdown being that, is that what you expect? I mean, is that the expectations that
we will see a shutdown?
That we will see a shutdown, we're not going to see funding after that?
I don't know. Of course, that will be up to the Republican leadership and also the Democrat in the House and the Democrat leadership in the Senate, what they come to. If the discussion is over money, will we two figures, whether it's $20 billion that we cut or whether it's $62 billion that we cut, if that's the discussion and we aren't including something like defunding Planned Parenthood or defunding Obamacare, then to me we're not focusing on the main thing, because we're looking at a $3.8 trillion budget deficit. And just we know this week that the war in Libya has been $600 million, and we'll spend far more than that the longer that we stay in this conflict. So how is it then that we're actually going to see any real savings? How is that possible? We had a tax compromise bill that cost us well in excess of the $62 billion that we're hoping to save. So we're not going in the right direction right now. We're not changing government enough to appreciably make a difference on paying down the debt and also getting our spending to balance. We aren't anywhere near balance. We'll spend $1.65 trillion more than what we're taking in this year. This game will end. It will end. The music will stop and the game will be over. And the question is, how quickly will it happen? And I think that we just need to get very serious about this, explain to the American people really the dire straits that we're in financially and the tremendous opportunities that we have to turn the country around. We need to do that, and I don't feel that that's been done yet.
Talk about the dire straits financially, debt ceiling, we're awfully close. We have all this additional spending going on. What's the chance the debt ceiling is going to be raised?
Well, unfortunately, I think it's a good chance. I will not be voting to raise the debt ceiling because, as you know and as your viewers know, the debt ceiling is much like if a person has a credit card and your credit card reaches its limit. And so you go into maybe Target to go buy something and you swipe your card and the card says not approved because you've reached your limit. That's what's happened to the federal government. We're about to have our credit card not approved the next time we go on a shopping spree. And so now Congress will be voting to increase the amount we can spend so that we can just keep on spending. We can't keep that up. We have to make a decision about our spending priorities. And so we are desperately in need of reform of government. We need to do it now rather than kick the can down the road.
You've been traveling a lot to Iowa and New Hampshire, a lot of presidential speculation. I want to talk about something you mentioned in Iowa. A lot of people talk about the economy and jobs, and there's been stimulus bills, there's been all these different things. You mentioned a two-parent family is the key to economic recovery. Can you flesh that out? How does that work?
Well, historically, the family is the basic unit of government. Before government gets involved, you have the family unit. And we've seen a marked growth in the number of children born out of the benefit of marriage between a mom and dad. In 1960, as recent as 1960, 5% of all births in the United States were out of wedlock births. So 95 of all America's babies were born with the benefit of a married mother and father. When you have a married mother and father, you have stability for the child, and you tend to have an ability to have financial wherewithal to be able to pay for the upbringing of that child, albeit at different economic strata. Now we have 41% of all babies that are born without the benefit of a married mom and dad. Quite often what that means is that the government becomes the provider for that child, and the government becomes the one rearing that child. When you go from 5% of children in need of government supports to 41% of America's children needing government supports, perhaps for as long as 20 years or near 20 years, that has profound fiscal consequences for our nation. And I think we need to keep that in mind.
All right, we got to let you go. We know you have a lot of stuff to do. One quick question. I know nobody has given you this opportunity. Will you run for president?
Well, the decision will be made, and it will probably be made sometime early in the summer. So it's not on or off the table, but we'll make the decision then.
Representative Michele Bachmann, thanks for being with us.
Thank you. I appreciated it. Thank you.